Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a wonderful, restful lunch break. We will take roll call to establish a quorum. Dolores Trujillo is here. Vice President Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan here.
Elizabeth Woods.
Woods, present.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez here.
Trisha Nguyen.
Trisha Nguyen here.
Susan Naranjo. Susan on? Okay, we'll move on. David Lawler.
David Lawler's here.
And Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz is here.
All right. Moving on. Item 6.2, consideration of continuing education exemption for implicit bias training. Requirement established by AB 1407, Burke, Chapter 445, Statutes of 2021.
Thank you. I will open this up. So in the passing of AB 1407, our nurses are now required to complete 1 hour of implicit bias in their first license renewal, period. The reason that that is of concern to our board is our board previously did not require any CEUs for the first license renewal. So this did change that requirement and made it 1 hour in 2 years' time for implicit bias training only. All other CEUs continue to be waived and not a requirement for renewing the license in the initial time period. We processed what's called a Form 100. That is a section that allows for us to clarify minor instances. It's non-substantial change within the regulatory process. That was turned in. We haven't got the decision back on that yet, but what that does is add specific language into section 1452 of our California Code of Regulations that is a direct copy and paste from that bill that was put into law. And so the one question that remains for our board to consider is other continuing education units have a waiver per se. And so what they have are exceptions. And so if a person is disabled greater than a year or goes on military deployment for greater than a year, they get time to complete the continuing education unit requirement. That requirement is 30 CEUs over a 2-year time period. This is only requiring 1 CEU in the initial renewal period of the first time being licensed. But we do need to ask if that's something that the board wants to extend the exceptions to allow for that for this 1 hour training. So if you have any questions around this, our thought is that it's 1 hour of implicit bias training. It can be completed online. There is no requirement for it to be in person. It is 1 hour over a 2-year renewal period time and the only CEU requirement. And so that was kind of our impetus of asking this question to see if the board wanted to proceed with that or if they wanted to allow for an exemption.
Now, if someone is overseas, Lori, having access to a computer would help them complete this requirement, correct?
It is. It's 1 hour, and computer can be your handheld personal device as well. It doesn't have to be an actual CPU or a laptop to be able to complete these continuing education requirements.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Thoughts?
Well, I don't have a question, but I mean, it is just 1 hour and it is an important topic and it's being applied to professionals throughout the state. So I don't feel particularly strongly that we ought to carve out an exemption for our licensees.
I agree with you, Tricia.
Okay, so Tricia, do you want
I
to
would-
do the motion and then Dolores a second? Or sorry, David, you were you were coming in, so I'll pause and let you go ahead.
I don't know where the raise your hand feature is on our meeting. Like I have on Zoom, I have a raise my hand feature. I absolutely think it aligns with the just culture that we heard a presentation on earlier. To put it in context, teachers do 2 full 8-hour days of implicit bias training. So, and it's in person. So 1 hour online, I think is the least they can do.
And I'm in agreement.
Thank you. And just for some clarification for the stakeholders on, this is not the only requirement that we have as licensees as RNs. So there has been 2 bills that have been passed in the recent years. One bill initially required implicit bias to be part of all continuing education units that are in direct patient care, et cetera. And so the 30 units that are required to be done on an annual, every 2 years. Those now was part of the update that we did in our regulatory text this year that I kind of covered in our my EO update, was an update to 1450 and 1456. And that did require that implicit bias be part of all of those direct patient care continuing education requirements. Additionally, this bill that we're talking about right now, 1407, came in and required 1 hour of implicit bias training to be done as a graduation requirement for our nursing schools. 1 hour of implicit bias training to be done in healthcare facilities that offer a new grad training onboarding process. And additionally, it captures any of the endorsement apps coming in from the applicants coming in from out of state, or people who are renewing their license for the first time by requiring this 1 hour of implicit bias training to be done in the first renewal cycle. So it is kind of starting to become looked upon and required within healthcare, and it's a really great thing. But it's not just 1 hour, just to put some context in. The question here is only about 1 hour. All of the other requirements we've been able to implement without having to come to the board for a specific decision. If the board decides to allow for the exemption, we would move forward with a rulemaking package to add that to our regulations. If the board chooses not to add an exemption to this requirement, then we are fully implemented and will not have to pursue anything additional in regards to implementing this bill.
I would like to make a motion. Oh, go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, no, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I would like to make a motion that we do not need to move forward with an exemption.
That's it. That's an appropriate motion, Dolores. Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was that?
That second, was that you, Vicky?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks, Vicky. All right, BRN moderator, can you open it up for public comment, please?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Flora Haas would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Thank you, moderator. I totally agree that an exemption should not be made for this topic. I would like to advise the board that I have recently taken 3 different implicit bias online programs, each of them about an hour. And although they cover the material as indicated, the topic is such that it would require, for the best use of the information, to have some discussion with either peers or supervisor afterwards. It is insufficient to assume that reading the material online in an hour will truly allow a nurse to look at themselves, to truly understand where they are guilty of implicit bias, since it is such a subtle activity that we all have. And so I urge us to think beyond the 1 hour and beyond the limit of an online program. Thank you, board.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right, we'll have a motion on the floor in a second. We'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Vice President Mary Fagan,
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods,
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez,
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Susan Naranjo,
Susan Naranjo, yes.
Patricia Nguyen,
When, yes.
David Lawler,
Yes.
and Vicki Granowitz.
Granowitz, yes.
All right, motion carries. Moving on. Item 7.0, so we're looking at 7.2, information only. So we're on the next advisory committee, which is 7.2.2. This is the Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee, NMAC.
Yes, thank you. And the chair was not able to attend our meeting today to do a report out. So I will fill in. So the Nurse Midwife Advisory Committee was held on the same date as the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee, and that was on November 1st. As part of their meeting, they discussed reappointment of the chair and vice chair, and very similar to the NPAC meeting where Sam gave the update. And they too voted to continue the people that were in the previous role of chair and vice chair. Then they went on, I did do another executive officer update, very similar material that the NPAC received. And then they went into a discussion and possible action regarding the formation of subcommittees. This Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee really want to lay out a plan of review and inclusion of their members and set up some work groups so that they can work through getting some things managed and updated, as we know that our website is in need of update, and really just continuing that quality improvement process through regulation updates and packages as needed. And so they voted to form a subcommittee that focuses on regulation, another subcommittee that focuses on scope of practice, a subcommittee that focuses on updating our website as well. So with that, there was a robust discussion around how those would occur in a subcommittee form that is a meeting of 2 people as part of the advisory group, excuse me, outside of a publicly noticed meeting, and then how they would bring that work back to a publicly noticed advisory committee meeting that would then allow for the entire committee to have discussion on it, make any amendments, accept it, et cetera, and make a recommendation to the board based on that information. And there was a lot of clarification done on what the role the advisory committee serves, what the role our board serves in providing clarification that the board's focus is protection of the public and not necessarily promotion of the profession. And so just a lot of discussion and redirection and guidance provided during that meeting. Additionally, there was a lot of discussion on the disciplinary guidelines and just kind of redirection there. We do plan to have a joint Nurse Midwife Advisory Committee and a Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee to be held in January, and with the hopes that it will be held in January. Sorry, we haven't officially got quorum on it yet. But as soon as we get quorum, that's where our Chief of Enforcement, Shannon Johnson, will come in and give a presentation on the disciplinary guidelines, on any updates proposed to that, get any feedback, share statistics on how many APRNs are actually brought through in probation or discipline or intervention, so that they have an understanding of really what that means to them when they're making those decisions. And then we'll take that feedback from them on the disciplinary guidelines and incorporate that into the regulatory package that is our disciplinary guidelines that we are looking at updating next year. So that was the biggest discussions that happened with NMAC that were of importance to bring forward. There was no motion to bring anything forward to the board, as nothing more than just establishing those committees were done in the November 1st meeting. If you have any questions, I'd like to take them. And if not, I can move on to 7.2.3 and 7.2.4 as all part of this agenda. I'm going to do one public comment, as these are all information only and all updates on the advisory committees if you wish.
Any questions or comments? No? Okay, go ahead, Lori. We'll move on.
No problem. In our, the next one is the Advanced Practice Registered Nursing Advisory Committee. And that is the APRNAC. You do see that further down in the agenda where we will be, where they were discussed at length in the Nurse Practice Committee. As part of that discussion, they were aware of this discussion. So in their meeting, there was talk about the continuation of the APRN committee and whether or not that was going to continue or not. There was discussion on members continuing or not continuing. And so their last meeting actually was held in September on the 22nd. And there was some public comment received. They did ask for a couple letters to be shared with the board members, and that was included in the packet for the board members to review. And then the CNS update and the CRNA update, those are brought in further Nurse Practice Committee work as well further down in here. And so all of that stuff did come from the APRN. We did discuss it. It was presented as a item on the Nurse Practice Committee, and recommendations were put forward to the board on that. So if there are any more questions, the chair was going to be here to present, but he had a hard stop at 1 p.m. And so he was not able to be present to discuss any further with the APRNAC. Any questions or anything on that from our board? If not, I can advance to the Nurse Education Workforce Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, no problem. So in the Nurse Education Workforce Advisory Committee, they actually met a while back. And so the, let me try to find their exact date. They met in July. And that was their first meeting in the past 2 years. And so it was nice to bring them back. We did go ahead and schedule another Nurse Education Workforce Advisory Committee that will be held this year. And so this was just a really basic update of the Nurse Education Workforce Advisory Committee, where we elected chairs, gave welcoming introductions, made a plan for next year's meetings, and they had some input on 1410.5 that already came back to the board, and you guys took that input into consideration. But that is where that one is at, and so no additional updates there. And Garrett Chan is our chair of this committee, and he too had a hard stop today, I believe at about 11 o'clock. And so he was not able to report out either today. So I'm here to fill in. So that is where we're at with the 4 advisory committees to our board. Understand that they typically do a report out to the Nurse Practice Committee, and that is where all of the updates were heard and recommendations given to the board based on that committee and the feedback that they've received from these advisory groups. Any questions? Okay. Seeing no questions, we could go out to public comment.
Thank you.
Items 7.23, 7.2.2, 7.2.3, and 7.2.4. 7.2.1 was already heard earlier.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment."
Hey,
Alyssa
Board-
Brown? Yes.
Real Thank you. Alyssa Brown is actually speaking in place of Mitch, that was the chair. So she can give a report out and there would be no time constraint to her report. I missed that in communication. I'm sorry.
Do you want me to make her a panelist or do you want me to just unmute her?
She could be a panelist for right now or unmute it, whatever's easiest for you. She just doesn't have a time limit as she is reporting out for the APRN committee as delegated by Mitchell Erickson, who is the chair of that committee.
Okay. Alyssa, I'm going to elevate you to panelist and you are ready to go. Uh-oh. Did we? Alyssa?
Sorry, I just saw the unmute. Thank you. Thank you, Loretta. I'm just going to add a few things. I won't need all that full time. I'm trying to summarize it because I recently heard from Mitch. Some of the other things we looked at, and this was to keep the public informed and keep the profession informed, was to look at different regulations that occurred state and federally, and how we would get that information to the public and to the profession, and to include in advisories or frequently asked questions, direct links to those places so they would have that information. So we have been looking at all of those. There was one federal change that allows clinical nurse specialists and nurse practitioners to order home care services. This was a real national coup, and now we have to see how it plays out statewide. But it means that they can certify and recertify home services, so there's no delay for the patients receiving home care. They don't have to wait for the doctor who did not do the assessment to come and sign something. They can sign it directly. And he also talked about the future of the APRN Advisory Committee, and we'll talk more about that, I think, later on. He did send along letters that all 4 professional groups of APRNs have done endorsing the continuation of the advisory committee. Let's see, there was clarification about telehealth nursing services that we discussed. These are issues that cross all of the APRN practice. And then some specific about CNSs and CRNAs, excuse me, and some certification issues. The public participation in the APRNAC meetings continues to support the continuation of the APRN Advisory Committee and its mandate to create a forum for practice guidance involving representatives of all APRN professionals and the public collectively. And Mitch wrote, this serves to limit additional committee oversight by BRN staff for 4 separate committees, 2 in statute and 2 in the behest of the BRN board for CRNAs and CNSs. He graciously submits this report, and I thank you very much, and we'll talk more again. I have his report for later on as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Pamela Jane Nye would like to make a comment. 1 second, please. Hello, go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Pamela Jane Nye, and I am a clinical nurse specialist. I understand the APRN Advisory Board has been disbanded. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I would like to speak on behalf of the California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists. I am also an associate professor to clinical nurse specialists and nurse practitioners at UCLA. And
This is Russ. I apologize. Moderator, please pause her time. Ms. Nye, again, I apologize for the interruption. You started by saying you believe the APRN Advisory Committee was disbanded. Is that what I heard?
yes, is that correct?
Not exactly, no. I believe we may even be talking about that a little bit later. The APRN Advisory Committee, as of right now, is still in existence. Its scope has been modified a little bit, I think, over the last year or two, given that we created the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee and also the Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee was kind of recast in statute. So the APRN Advisory Committee slightly scaled back its scope to exclude consideration of those topics that would be naturally before the other committees. So right now, APRN committee focuses on issues affecting all APRN groups, as well as issues affecting the other two APRN groups that currently don't have advisory committees in this board, these CNS and CRNA groups. So again, let me take a look at our agenda here. I apologize.
It is scheduled for
Yeah,
agenda 7.7.
7.7. Yes, 7.7. So if that addresses your comment or changes it at all, please keep that in mind. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to carry on and make your public comment. Just wanted to provide that clarification, though. Thank you.
If you want to speak specifically on the APRNAC and whether it sunsets or not, she may wish to hold off for agenda item 7.7 versus just the updates from the advisory committees to the board. But she's able to continue now as well, and we can take that into consideration for 7.7.
I think it would be more appropriate at the point of 7.7 on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comments. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. 7.3 is discussion and possible action regarding the recommendations from NPAC on the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Professional Examination Services report on the occupational analysis. This was requested under the passing of AB 890 and is now our Business Professions Code 2837.105. You will see that in our meetings, our meeting materials, Heidi Linzer is in the panelist and will give a report out. This report is found on our website, not only in the board materials, but if you are able to go onto our homepage, you will see it under the quick hits under AB 890, Nurse Practitioner Scope of Practice. And you can click on that. That'll take you to it as well. And then on the What's New, it has the OPES Occupational Analysis for Nurse Practitioners there as well. When Samantha Gambles-Farr came in and presented earlier for 7.2.1 and gave the update prior to doing the comment section, she mentioned that the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee made a recommendation to the board, and that was to accept the OPES report stating that there was no examination needed for the nurse practitioner that holds a national certification to advance to a 103 or a 104 status on their pathway to a more independent practice. So that is the update here from me. I'm going to stay on and available, and I'm going to turn it over to Heidi Linzer. Thank you. And Heidi, real quick, as you unmute and test your mic, will you be needing to share your PowerPoint, and are you going to need control of that?
Yes.
Yes, please. So board moderator, can you allow her to share her PowerPoint, share her screen? So Heidi, it should go very similarly to what you did with the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee, where you open up your PowerPoint and you share your screen on the bottom bubble down below, it'll say share. If you click on that, you could choose your PowerPoint.
This one.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, working on it.
Here we go. It's showing front and center for us.
Okay, hold on a second. Showing slides for me, just a minute. How's that? Is that still good?
It looks good for us. Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me time to give a presentation. I know a lot of you have read our recommendations from your packet. Appreciate that. But I'm going to give you a little bit more information of the project that we conducted for BRN to evaluate the Nurse Practitioner National Board Certification Examinations. As I was introduced, I'm Dr. Heidi Linser. I'm the Chief of the Office of Professional Examination Services. And presenting with me today, or she'll be here for questions, is Dr. Tracy Montez, who was recently appointed Executive Officer of the Dental Board. Dr. Montez was the Division Chief of OPS while we worked on this project. So during the presentation, I'm going to cover the following topics. We'll be providing an overview of OPS, what our role is, and the standards and guidelines that we follow. We'll give a description of the NP project, the results of the project, and our recommendations. So first, just to give a step back on OPES and who we are and what we do. This slide provides an overview of OPS's role as part of the Department of Consumer Affairs. OPS functions as an in-house consulting division for DCA. Part of our role is to review licensure requirements. This includes determining whether examinations are required, the type of examinations that should be used, and situations when alternative means of assessing competencies are appropriate. This slide shows the laws, standards, guidelines, and policies that OPS uses to guide the work that we do and the recommendations that we make. We'll refer to the relevant sections throughout the presentation. So the first gives you the background on the NP project mandates. The purpose of this project was to create a pathway for nurse practitioners who currently practice under standardized procedures to allow them to transition to practicing independently. BRN is required to develop transition to practice requirements. BRN and OPS are required to conduct NP occupational analyses to determine the competencies required for NPs in independent practice. The sun's in my eyes a little. Yeah, thank you. For this purpose, independent practice, as we've been discussing during this board meeting, is defined as performance of the functions specified in BMP Code Section 2837.103. And OPS was also required to evaluate NP certification examinations to determine if a supplemental examination is needed. Finally, one you may be less familiar with is BMP Code 139. And that requires that OPS perform a psychometric and security review of all examinations used for licensure. And that applies to all boards and bureaus in DCA, not just this project. And it also applies to national and state-based exams. For more on BMP Code 139. It also requires that boards conduct an occupational analysis for each examination that's used for licensure every 5 years. Section 139 mandates that OAs must be conducted in accordance with guidelines set by OPS Policy 1802, which is licensure examination validation. These guidelines specify that the 2014 standards for educational and psychological testing are the most relevant standards for conducting OAs. We typically refer to them as the standards. The standards require that in order to develop a valid test, first you need a detailed description of the content domain of interest. In addition, a close link between test content and job content should be demonstrated. An OA also may be known as a job analysis, practice analysis, task analysis, or role delineation study. Regardless of its title, the OA is the defining source of validation for the content of a credentialing examination. It can also serve many other purposes, as I've shown here on this slide. So for this project, OPS conducted OAs of 8 NP specialty areas. These are the specialty areas currently recognized by the BRN for nurse practitioners. The OAs were conducted between August 2021 and January 2022. In this slide, I have the OA process. This is the process that we use to conduct the 8 OAs. Often an OA includes a survey of practitioners. Due to the time constraint that we had to conduct the 8 OAs, we did not conduct a survey for this project. However, we did conduct 8 focus groups with a total of 49 nurse practitioners serving as subject matter experts, or SMEs, as we call them. OPS documented the process and results in an occupational analysis report. The report provides the details of the process, the demographics of the SMEs who participated, and the final tasks and knowledge for each specialty area. During the focus groups, we also asked the SMEs to compile a list of common conditions and procedures. The list was developed to provide additional depth of content for understanding the work performed by NPs. And as E.O. Melby said, the report is posted on the BRN website. So what you have here is an example of one of the scope of practice results from the occupational analysis that we did for family NP. This is the scope of practice that resulted from the OA that we completed. For each specialty area, there is a similar description of practice broken down into specific task and knowledge statements. All of the descriptions of practice include a patient assessment related content area, a diagnosis related content area, a health management content area, a professional ethics and responsibility content area, and a legal requirements for practice content area. However, each one has a specific tasks and knowledge describing the content for that specialty area. So for family NP, in addition to this breakdown that you see here, there are 61 tasks and 181 knowledge statements. All of this information for each of the 8 specialty areas is in the OA report. After the OA was completed, OPS evaluated the 11 NP certification examinations. Note that there are 2 certification examinations for family NP, 2 certification examinations for adult gerontology NP in primary care, and 2 for adult gerontology NP in acute care, and that adds up to 11. As I mentioned previously, BMP Code 139 mandates that all national examinations must be reviewed in accordance with policy OPS 1802 and the standards. The review included the following steps: psychometric and security evaluation. This is required by BMP Code 139 for any examinations used for licensure in California. OPS also conducted a linkage study to evaluate the extent to which competencies identified in the California OA were assessed by the certification examinations. And this is required by BMP Code 2837.105. To conduct the linkage study, OPS facilitated 8 additional focus groups with SMEs to compare the NP certification examination OAs to the description of practice from the California OA. So we call this a linkage study because we asked the SMEs to link the content of the national OA with the content of the California OA. During the linkage study focus groups, OPS worked with the SMEs to identify the extent to which the certification examination reflected California practice. OPS also reviewed documentation from the 11 NP certification examinations from 5 examination providers. We reviewed them against the standards, guidelines, and policies that I mentioned earlier. OPS evaluated the 11 examinations in these 5 areas. In summary, OPS found that the 11 examinations appeared to meet professional guidelines and technical standards. This was based on the information provided to us by the certification examination providers. OPS identified and documented specific findings for each of these components. We completed a detailed report for each examination. In summary, OPS found that the examinations adequately assess critical competencies required to perform safe and effective NP practice in California, as specified in BMP Code 2837.103. 3 of the 5 NP providers approved posting of the reports on the BRN website, and those reports are available. So we're returning to this slide where we can see the description of practice for the family NP. The results of the linkage study showed that the certification examinations assess all of the information in content areas 1 to 4. However, none of the examinations assess knowledge related to California specific laws and regulations. That content is specified in content area 5. While some legal requirements for practice were covered, for example, HIPAA regulations, there are many California specific laws and regulations, such as mandated reporting of abuse, that were not covered. The fact that California specific laws and regulations are not assessed is to be expected for a national examination. By definition, national examinations assess competencies common to multiple jurisdictions. In summary, for each of the 8 specialty areas and each of the 11 examinations, OPS and the SMEs determined that critical competencies in content areas 1 through 4 were adequately assessed. Although California's specific laws and regulations were not assessed by the certification examinations, you've already heard our results, that OPS does not believe that a supplemental examination is needed. I'd like just to give you some more information about how we came to that conclusion. OPS 1 is sensitive to the legislative intent that the transition to practice requirements should not create an unnecessary burden. In addition, there are several safeguards in place. During the linkage study workshops, the SMEs indicated that the California specific law information was thoroughly taught and assessed during the educational process. OPS believes that also, for the most part, the general settings in which NPs work, especially the 103s, which they're going to be working in, provide sufficient administrative oversight to ensure compliance with California laws and regulations. NPs also have continuing education requirements that I know you're talking about today. The California specific laws and regulations could be part of a CE requirement to ensure that NPs remain current. Regarding practice-related competencies, the certification examinations also have recertification requirements, such as taking the examination again or completing CE requirements just to be recertified. This will help ensure that NP knowledge, methods, equipment, and skills will remain current. As you all know, the practice of medicine changes rapidly through new equipment and technology. This is why it's critical that the NP examinations keep their OAs updated and detailed. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Finally, OPS recommends that the BRN take this opportunity to carefully consider the transition to practice requirements, as I know you had a lot of discussion about that earlier. As part of the project, OPS solicited input from physicians, and as you've heard today, there was some physicians expressed that NP education and training should be sufficiently rigorous to prepare NPs for independent practice. Their concerns were related to clinical experience and decision-making. However, from OPS perspective, a supplemental examination is not the best way to measure those type of competencies. In addition to making a recommendation on whether a supplemental examination is needed, OPS has some general recommendations for the certification examination providers. OPS reviewed 11 OAs, and you hear me talking about OAs a lot. Earlier, I mentioned that an OA could be called a job analysis, a practice analysis, or a task analysis. Note that the title contains the word analysis. The final OA document should be a detailed and comprehensive description of practice, broken down into meaningful, well-organized content areas. It should also contain delineated tasks or competencies and specific knowledge areas. Detailed OAs make it easier for item writers to write good questions, easier for candidates to understand what they will be tested on, and easier for the public to see the work performed by the profession. OPS recommends that the examination providers ensure that they receive a high-quality product from the consultants hired to perform their OA. Another concern that we noted during the review was the selection of SMEs. DCA policy OPS 2001 specifies that board members, committee members, and instructors should not serve as SMEs in the licensure process. This is examination development. This is due to potential conflict of interest, undue influence, and security considerations. Although board members and educators may seem uniquely qualified and certainly motivated to participate in examination development activities, OPS strongly discouraged their service in this role. Finally, Departmental Procedures Memorandum OPS 2201, Examination Security, specifies that online or remote proctoring is not recommended for high-stakes examinations due to increased risk of item harvesting and examination subversion. We understand that remote proctoring is popular right now, but we do not believe the technology is currently sufficient to mitigate all the risks. So, for summary and recommendations, as you've kind of been throwing around during the meeting today, although our findings indicate that a supplemental examination is not needed, the certification examinations are a critical part of the transition to practice requirements. They need to fully comply with psychometric and security standards, conduct a thorough and detailed occupational analysis, and stay current. They should be reviewed every 5 years. To summarize, OPS was asked to determine if the competencies required for independent practice can be assessed through the existing certification examinations. Based on our evaluation, OPS believes that there may be a need for additional competency in complex problem solving. These competencies are best assessed through clinical experience and mentorships rather than a supplemental examination. As you know, the BRN is currently proposing a formal attestation requirement to validate the 3-year clinical experience requirement. And OPS recommends that as part of that attestation process, standardized criteria be established for each specialization area. This will help ensure that candidates have demonstrated competence in the full range of patient populations and medical conditions that they will be expected to diagnose and treat in independent practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. So, board moderator will have you take back control of the screen at this point. And then just some updates that I wanted to make sure that was covered with this is that the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee did recommend the acceptance of the no examination for that, and that was the recommendation put forward to the board. Additionally, what Samantha had talked about in her update, and we kind of talked about a little bit in public comment as well as just kind of back and forth, is that this report will go to the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee, where they will read this, they'll go in depth with that report, and they will determine whether or not any additional regulation needs to be written based on the recommendations from OPES on the continuing education units, on the mentorship, transition to practice, etc. And so with that, there will be more to come. We will hear from our Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee. I will give report outs very similar to what we do in both the practice committee as well as the board committee if any changes or updates are going through with that. One of the things that was important to point out in the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee when this was first discussed was that this was a measurement of the national certification exams to see if it follows and adequately addresses the competencies that were needed for independent practice for the nurse practitioner, and that it did not look at the education preparation. And so I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that in California Code of Regulations 16, Section 1484. That is our code that addresses the nurse practitioner education. And in the nurse practitioner education, we set as the board the requirement that nurse practitioners follow the national guidelines from the, sorry, I'm just trying to find the name of the thing because I never am able to say it correctly, but it is NOF, and it is the National Organization of Nurse Practitioner Faculties, and they have core competencies. And so in 1484, it specifically calls out that the program of study that prepares a nurse practitioner shall be approved by the board and be consistent with the nurse practitioner curriculum core competencies as specified by the National Organization of Nurse Practitioner Faculties in the Nurse Practitioner Core Competencies Content 2017, which is hereby incorporated by reference. And so what that means is all of our board approved nurse practitioner programs in California follow that national requirement. That also means that when a nurse practitioner comes to be licensed in our state, they can only be licensed here through 3 methods. The first method is if they graduate from a nurse practitioner program. If the second one is they come in through national certification, which was just discussed and shows that it matches those requirements. And third is through an equivalency. They didn't graduate from California school that's approved. They didn't come with a national certification, but they're asking to be considered. And that happens on an evaluation regularly, but very rarely is it granted. So with that into consideration, I wanted to make sure that the board understood that the education, there is the core competencies, and that national education requirement that is also a requirement of our schools, and our schools are required to be accredited in order to even have an approved nurse practitioner program. Follow those, and they have part of the competence area is independent practice. And one of the things to also remember with that independent practice that they focus on is that this is a national requirement. And we have right currently, I believe there are 20, I may be wrong with this, but there about half of the United States allows for full practice. And so they're using these educational core competencies, they're using these national certifications, and the states are allowing for full practice authority. Washington has full practice authority, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, all of the states immediately surrounding us have full practice authority. Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, etc. Utah has a reduced practice authority, but California is the only one that currently has a restricted practice. And so we did get some feedback in public comment that says that this was never done before, and that nurse practitioners have not had independent practice. And that is true in California, but the national certification and the national guidelines for education are done at a national level, and more than half the states are using that for independent practice without this transition of practice that we're considering here. So I wanted to get that out to you guys, make sure you guys had a full understanding of that and what that looked like. And then the motion up here, board president, is to accept or not accept or defer taking any action. I want to let you know if you do accept the recommendations of the OPES examination, it doesn't mean that we will implement all of them. It means that it will go to the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee, which will then be able to deep dive into it, make recommendations, develop regulations as determined, and give that to the board for consideration. You're on mute.
Thank you, Lori. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing that there's no questions or comments, I would like to make a motion to accept the action on the Office of Professional Examination Services report on the occupational analysis.
Jovita seconds.
Thank you. BRN moderator, can you open it up for public comment, please?
Just real quick, as you're opening it up, there was no action, so just accept the recommendations from instead of action. I think we're both doing well.
I caught it at the, I got it.
Thank you.
This is Reza. With the motion being phrased that way, I just want to provide some clarification in anticipation of some of the public comments we're going to get. Accepting the OPES recommendations does not mean that we are incorporating their recommendations regarding transition to practice. Those recommendations, if the board wished to implement them, would have to be the subject of a regulation package sometime in the future. So with this motion, this is for the benefit of board members and everybody. With this motion, we're not carrying out those recommendations regarding transition to practice. We're merely accepting the report that OPES provided. So hope that's clear.
Correct. Thank you, Reza. That was the intent of that, was to accept the report.
Didn't mean to say action. I'm sorry.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Katrina Reyes would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Reyes of the California Academy of Family Physicians. In determining whether the national certification examinations are sufficient, the OPS analysis should not have compared current NP practice in California with the content of the NP certification examinations. It should have compared the NP certification examinations with the ability to perform the functions specified in BPC section 2837.103C without physician supervision. Though some of these functions specified in the law may be functions NPs currently perform, NPs do not currently perform these functions without standardized procedures. Current examinations are mostly designed with the expectation that NPs will be practicing under physician supervision. Hence, this analysis should have been whether the examinations are sufficient to test an NP's ability to perform the functions in the law independently. The OPS report itself states that examinations do not assess knowledge related to California-specific NP laws and regulations, which would include performing the functions specified in BPC section 2837.103C independently. A supplemental examination can take a form other than multiple choice that can better assess ability to practice independently. We are concerned that without a supplemental examination and with undefined minimum standards for transition to practice, the law is not being implemented in a way that will create structures to ensure NPs have the training, experience, and competency to practice independently, thereby subverting the BRN's mission to protect California's healthcare consumers. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Charlotte Sui would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Good afternoon again. My name is Charlotte Sui, and I'm speaking on behalf of the California Medical Association. We do appreciate OPS's work on this and recognize the need for not imposing additional hurdles, which has been cited several times, but that fear should be balanced against patient safety. Therefore, we believe a supplemental examination should be required and include a clinical component. There are several parts of the OPES analysis that brings to bear this concern. First, OPES made its recommendation based on the assumption that there are safeguards in place, noting that there should be sufficient administrative oversight that precludes the need for a supplemental exam. However, this assumption would be in direct conflict with the corporate bar that was extended to 103 and 104 NPs. Our second concern has to do with process and whether physician input was adequately consulted. The only mention of physician input was in the transition to practice section. And earlier today, we heard that there were several focus groups that were conducted, including 49 people, all of whom were NPs and not one physician. We therefore see this as a critical gap in the examination analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Sharon McDaniel would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
All right. Okay, I hope you could hear me okay. Thumbs up if you can.
We can.
All right, great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Sharon McDaniel. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I represent D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services. We are a large behavioral health clinic. I certainly appreciate OPA's report and their analysis. And we here at D.D. Hirsch agree with OPA. We agree with OPA's recommendations against an additional exam for nurse practitioners before being able to practice independently. And we, as I'm sure mentioned earlier today, NPs are highly qualified, educated, and tested, and an additional exam is not needed. And Loretta, you were right, you were in the ballpark. Yes, 28 other states actually allow NPs to practice independently. So we disagree with the recommendation for additional supervision clinically for clinical experience during this transition to practice for NPs. And with AB 890, when it went through its rigorous legislative process with extensive vetting and multiple, amendments, this question was asked and answered during the bill's path through the legislature, and no additional clinical experience outside what is outlined in 890 should be required. And I think, California needs to get on board with all of the other 28 states and the known practice of NPs and our quality care. And there's tons of surveys to reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Sarani Harkwan would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hello, thank you very much. I want to commend the OPES for their work on this pretty complex topic. And I really was impressed by the number of exams I went through. I've done exam review for nurse practitioners in the past and find that they're different and also complex in their own specialty way. I am a nurse practitioner that functions in a community clinic setting in rural Sonoma County and have been a nurse practitioner for over 20 years. I also agree that additional exams are not necessary. I took a state exam as well as a national exam when I became a nurse practitioner, so state licensed as well as nationally certified, and maintain my national certification like my physician colleagues maintain their national certification as well. I disagree that the OPS report suggests that we need additional supervised clinical experience, having functioned for 20 some years under standardized procedures, as well as the new nurse practitioners functioning under standardized procedures for 4,600 hours before they can even apply to be a 103. Mentoring programs vary across the country. There is no evidence to support that a mentoring program is necessary that is not evidence-based recommendation. Certainly they're nice, and certainly they do improve retention in practices, but not evidence-based in requirements for clinical quality. And then finally, specialized CE coursework is already required for me in family practice. So if I were for instance, a previous speaker was a psych mental health NP, she has a requirement to take CE credit that is specific to her specialty. So with that, I urge the board to move forward with the recommendation that OPES has put forward, that no further examination is necessary. And I would also like to urge the board to reject the concept that additional supervised clinical experience, mentoring programs, and specialized CE coursework is also required, because I believe that is not correct. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Ron Ordona would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Ordona, nurse practitioner with Senior Care Clinic House Calls. We appreciate OPS hard work in giving this report and doing their analysis, and we agree with the recommendation that there is no additional exam needed for nurse practitioners before being able to practice independently. NPs, as we all know, are highly qualified, educated, and tested, and an additional exam is just not necessary and will delay us further. We, however, disagree with OPS recommendation that additional supervised clinical hours are needed. As EO Melby has pointed out, there's, as of April 2022, 26 states, the District of Columbia, and 2 U.S. territories actually give full practice authority for NPs. AB 890 went through a rigorous legislative process with extensive vetting and multiple amendments, and this question was asked and answered during the bill's pathway through being a law. And so no additional clinical experience outside what is outlined in AB 890 should be required. Thank you very much for the Board of Nursing hard work on this and the NPAC committee's work as well.
Thank you for your comment. Kenny Chen would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Years I began in the state of New York, and I graduated from Columbia University, which has a 100% first-time passage rate on national board certifications. I was family trained and was hired into adult medicine as a hospitalist by the director of the residency program in New York City. She felt that given the rigor of my program and the national certification exam, that I was able to take on rounding in the hospital with the internal medicine residents. And then when I came to California, I was surprised by the restrictions. As you know, the state of New York, after 3,600 hours, no collaborative agreement is required. And it doesn't require a additional certification exam or supervised clinical experience. I hope that California can look to a large, diverse state such as New York for precedence. And so, but you know, I do appreciate the OPES report and agree that no exam is necessary. And also that the recommendation for additional mentorship is it's just like it's not consistent with the evidence that shows nurse practitioners provide as good, if not better, care than physicians do. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Margaret Parsons would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Practice clinicians within my practice and working with independent medical associations within the Sacramento region. I expressed concern about the OPS recommendation for no exam. Again, concern as there were not as many physicians on the panel. We're looking at an increased scope and having that balance of those that practice with independent panels, balancing in more discussion. In medicine, in all the other fields, we have that extra level of exam through, for us, med school, internship, residency, board certifications, and steps where not only our book knowledge, but also our clinical is reviewed and evaluated at each step of the way. So I'd encourage the consideration of exam, knowing that that may be not where this conversation goes. I do think that that additional level of what is that transition to practice with careful and further guidance and support. We want the nurse practitioners expanding up to 103, 104 to do a great job taking care of our Californians, taking care of our people, and to ensure the safety, to make sure that there is some definition, and the regulations are so vague at this point about what that transition looks like, the type of clinical care, the type of competencies that are expected to be reached. An independent panel without the physician as easily there. Not that I don't agree that nurses have so much they can do as part of our healthcare team in caring for patients, but for the safety of patients, making sure that that higher level of clinical competency is demonstrated and supported throughout their learning with a really clear plan on what transition to practice looks like, with, while mentorship may be a word I've heard may not have the evidence-based stuff, but that guidance and support in that next level of preparing for that independent practice, for managing that larger panel without necessarily direct supervision right there. So really looking forward to considering amendments to consider tightening, not tightening, but defining what transition to practice looks like, with additional clinical competencies that are evaluated and marked along the pathway. I thank you for the consideration and the opportunity to comment as we all work for the care of our Californians and to have a safe and open access, get people taken care of, but to make sure that there is good care and that we watch for all levels. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Mary would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Again, my name is Dr. Mary Tahiri. I've been a nurse practitioner for 17 years. I work for Department of Health, LA County in downtown Los Angeles, Skid Row, and I am a member of SEIU. We do appreciate OPES's report and its analysis, and thank you for all the hard work and the time that you've put in. We do agree with OPES's recommendation against an additional exam for nurse practitioners before being able to practice independently. Nurse practitioners are highly qualified, educated, and tested, and an additional exam we feel is not needed as well. There's been plenty of research that has shown that nurse practitioners are capable and qualified to practice independently. As someone had said earlier, there are 28 states that are advanced than California, and nurse practitioners are practicing independently without any issues, major issues that we've heard. As far as other comments that have been made here, that they're concerned about patient safety, it'd be great for them to share some of their evidence or research that has shown this. Otherwise, we do disagree with OPES's recommendation for additional supervised clinical experience during nurse practitioners' transition to practice. AB 890 went through a rigorous legislative process with extensive vetting and multiple amendments. So, this question was asked and answered during the bill's path, as mentioned earlier, through the legislator, and no additional clinical experience outside what is outlined in 890 should be required. So again, thank you for your time in this process.
Thank you for your comment. Karen Sonnenthal would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with all the comments regarding no further exam for any California NP. I think the comments that the physicians are making do not clearly make sense to me, in that they are not recognizing that the clinical programs, the master's prepared programs that the NPs go through, and then the national board exams that we have to take, they're already recognized by the 22 plus other states that are, and accepted by them to allow independent practice. So it's unclear to me why a California physician would think their concerns would supersede what has already been accepted and recognized and put into place as far as NP scope of practice and independent practice. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Laurel Malia Rothstetter would like to make a comment. 1 second, please. Oh, Laurel, you're not able. I show that you don't have a microphone or a headset. Hold on 1 second. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear?
Yes,
Test.
go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
excellent. Hi, yes, my name is Laurel Malia Raffet-Cedar, and I am a nurse practitioner serving an underserved community. And I also would like to thank the board for all their hard work. And I also see no need for a supplemental examination. I think the board, national board, is congruent with the scope of practice right now. And I think that's very well defined also in AB 890. And I would like to just vote my voice to there should be no concerns as far as including that into the transition of practice. We also don't need additional supervised clinical experience as part of the transition to practice. And I would urge them to reject this recommendation. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work of the OPES. Appreciations all around. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Scott RN would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
I've been following this as a student studying to be a family nurse practitioner, hopefully in a couple of years. I want to thank everyone for their work, from the committee to the board. And just to clarify some of the comments, I think there's a concept that's getting lost, and I may be misunderstanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the different levels that we're talking about creating among nurse practitioners don't represent a difference in scope of practice. They all have the same scope of practice. The difference is only in the level of supervision. And I think that's important because we talk about things like scope creep and things like that. The scope is remaining the same. This just sets up a system of various levels of supervision. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. Before we vote, are there any questions or comments from the board?
I have one. And it's because I am a public member and not a nurse myself. I need clarification for the people who are saying that they should take this test. Am I correct that these are people who have already passed the national exam? Now they're asking to take something else for the state of California?
Yes, that is correct. So I'll answer a couple of things just to make sure. The national exam is a national certification. They have to have that as a nurse practitioner in order to advance to a more independent practice for a 103 and 104. There's an exam associated with that, education requirement associated with that. And that exam was deemed to be equivalent by the OPES, where it validated that they have the abilities to kind of do the tasks required for independent practice. They OPS felt that that would be better determined outside of an exam, so no new exam requirement, but better determined with mentorship. One of the things in the nurse in the regulations where we kind of just as a board and what you guys voted on at the comments put forth on the transition to practice was really following the guidance of the statutory requirement. One of the sections in here in section 100, it says 2837.100, it is the intent of the legislator that the requirements under this article shall not be an undue or unnecessary burden to licensure or practice. The requirements are intended to ensure the new category of licensed nurse practitioner has the least restrictive amount of education, training, and testing necessary to ensure competent practice. And so that was really just something that was said in the law. It says the least in amount to ensure that. And that was what OPS kind of opined on. Additionally, in the transition of practice that is in statute and therefore does not need to be duplicative in regulation, it covers what the transition of practice would include. And it says transition of practice includes, but is not limited to, managing a panel of patients, working in a complex healthcare setting, interpersonal communication, interpersonal collaboration, and team-based care, complex healthcare settings, professionalism, and business management of practice. And so the definition of transition of practice says means additional clinical experience and mentorship provided to prepare a nurse practitioner to practice independently. So that entire transition of practice, that's the intent of it, is to have a clinical experience and a mentorship underneath the standardized procedures to prepare the nurse practitioner to practice independently, and included those specifications. And it was determined by the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee as well as our board throughout the regulatory process that nothing more really needed to be added to that other than just an attestation that those items have been met, and that it's done with them being in good standing, where there's not discipline and such with them, et cetera, et cetera. And so just some kind of qualifiers that the board had added onto that to ensure that additionally that there was no familial or financial relationship of the person that's attesting. So that was really what that was. Now, to put another context in there for the medical doctors and such, when they go through their education, I think the reason that they're asking for this is, they are prepared to be independent practitioners, and they do that through a very rigorous process. They have to take the U.S. medical licensing exam. And that is broken up into 3 steps. And that's something that our nurse practitioners do not do. So that's when they're kind of comparing apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. That's where that comes out. And so throughout med school, in year 2 of med school, they do the USMLE step 1. In year 3, they do a step 2. And there's 2 parts of step 2. And then during their first year of residency, they do the step 3 of that USMLE. And in order to become board certified and finish the residency, they have to pass all 3 steps of those. And I think that's where the medical doctors are kind of comparing their preparation with that of the nurse practitioner. The nurse practitioner, they have their education requirement. There is their normal testing, but there's no national testing as part of the nurse practitioner education requirement. And then to get into the transition of practice, they're required to have a national certification. That's the exam that OPS looked at. And then they enter a 6-year training program, essentially. And so that is the 3 years that they do as a 103, into transition of practice, and then additional 3 years as a 103 to become a 104. And that's essentially what the nurse practitioners are considering their 6-year residency. And they're trying to kind of come to correlations with this to kind of say this is what's needed. And so I do understand why the physicians are saying there needs to be more testing. That is the process that they use. Additionally, the transition of practice that's set up for the nurse practitioners, it does not require the provider that's overseeing it to be board approved. And there's not specific sections that they have to complete as they make it through that. With the residency program, those are board approved programs. They actually have to match to go into their residency, and they go to just set areas that can take them based on that. And so that residency type program is board approved. It is put through a rigorous eval. So you can definitely see why those sides are being argued between each other. And the board comes in to say what is safe. And so not to take sides with physicians or sides with nurse practitioners, but to say what is safe. Does the education adequately prepare them? Does the national certification ensure that knowledge has been attained? does our transition of practice support that growth to an independent practitioner, as long as they stay in good standing, as long as they complete this oversight and graduate from each step, and as long as they maintain that national certification, which is an exam they must recertify in every 5 years. So hopefully that answers your question.
This is Betty. I have a question about.
Yeah.
Sorry, Betty, I see
David's
David was speaking on mute.
Sorry.
We didn't catch
Oh,
you there, David.
I'm sorry, I was just thanking Loretta for clearing that up, and it just made me wonder why the extra clinical is being recommended when Lori just said they have 6 years of clinical mentorship or practice already under their belt going into that moment.
I think with OPS, they're asking for specific milestones, thank you, I'm so sorry. Specific kind of qualifiers throughout that 6 years, not an additional 6 years, but within that to have the board specify specific kind of leveling, okay, that you have to meet one before you go to the next, and make that much more clear. And that's something that our Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee can take into consideration, remembering that that advisory committee was specifically formed to address this. And it does state then 2837.102, which is part of that business profession code that was passed through AB 890, that says that the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee must make recommendations to the board on all matters related to nurse practitioners, including but not limited to education, appropriate standard care, and other matters. And so this is a perfect opportunity for them to come in and do this deep dive for the board, make recommendations, and we'll bring that forward to you when that's completed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Betty?
Yes, I have a question about the mentorship. What's the language around the mentorship? How long is it? Where is it done?
So the mentorship is in our Business Professions Code 2837.101C, and it defines the transition of practice there. And then on the regulatory language that we just voted on earlier, it was encompassed through that. So this entire process has defined the language on it, and what we were putting forth in regulations that defines the transition of practice. That's the mentorship. It's the transition of practice, Betty. So all of that stuff that we put in on the proposed language that said that it had to be done within 5 years of the application from the nurse practitioner. It has to be done in the direct patient care role that the nurse practitioner has the national certification in, by a mentor that is also in that role. So what you wouldn't see is a geriatric nurse practitioner that has a board certification in geriatrics being mentored by a pediatrician. You would have to have a similar mentorship. Additionally, it stated that there would be no financial or immediate family relationship. It said that this has to be completed in California. And the transition of practice is 3 years or 4,600 hours. And then once they've completed that transition of practice of 3 years working under standardized procedures with a physician, that they can then move into that second category, which is that of a 103 NP, where they will work an additional 3 years in a group setting. And that group setting is defined in the statute as well. And they define that as a healthcare setting that has at least one physician or surgeon in that setting that can continue that mentorship as they progress from that group setting with that collaboration to an independent practice that is not required to be done in a group setting.
So the mentorship is not an individual mentorship of a certain amount of hours or days or months.
It is the 3 years, or 4,600 hours that's defined in the transition of practice, and each NP has to go through that.
All right, that's considered the mentorship.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? We have a motion on the floor. Seeing that there's no other further questions or comments, we'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Vice President Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods.
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, yes.
Patricia Nguyen.
Nguyen, yes.
David Lawler.
David Lawler, yes.
And Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz, yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. Moving on to item 7.4. Actually, can we take a 5-minute bio break? And then we'll come back to 7.4.
Yeah, totally can.
So it's 3:46, so 3:50 or 3:51. All right, we're going to make this quick. Dolores Trujillo present, Vice President Mary Fagan. Mary's not back yet. Elizabeth Woods. Betty, you're still on mute.
Woods, present.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita present.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, present.
Thanks, Susan. Patricia Nguyen. Patricia Nguyen.
See that Mary is trying to unmute to check her audio.
Mary.
Fagan, I'm here.
Okay. Patricia Nguyen. Vicki Granowitz.
Granowitz, present.
David Lawler.
David's here.
Okay, so we just need Patricia Nguyen. We could probably go ahead and get started. I think everybody else is here. All right, moving on to item 7.4, discussion and possible action regarding revisions to board advisories, NPR B24, certification of clinical nurse specialist, 09-1999. Revised 12-2002 and 11-2008, and NPR 1-1, or is that I, Lori? I-29? I. Okay. General information for clinical nurse specialists regarding national certification 12-2002, revised 11-2008.
And this will be a lot as well. So I will open it up and explain this. So our board historically has taken positions and adopted models and utilized board advisories instead of regulations. And that's kind of been a historical practice that our board took in years past. That is not what we're doing moving forward. Moving forward, we will be moving towards implementing and developing regulations. But for the background here, in 1999, again in 2002, and then 2008, there were advisories that our board took to help the board license clinical nurse specialists and align us with the national bodies. And so National Council of State Boards of Nursing has what they put out. It's called an APRN consensus model. That APRN consensus model was adopted by our board in 2008, but there were no regulations that were developed to support it. In the meantime, the adoption of that consensus model, it does put us in alignment nationally, but because we haven't gone forth and developed regulation, it does limit us still. So currently, the only update that is needed right now is on the form regarding national certifications. That's NPR I-29. And previously, it included oncology national certification, and that is no longer accepted. And our board has not been utilizing that for quite some time. So what our board does is, you guys will find it down on, starting on page 34. These are the two national certifying bodies that our board accepts for licensure or certification as a clinical nurse specialist. And that is the adult geri, pediatric, and neonatal clinical nurse specialists that are given through the American Association of Critical Care Nursing, and the adult geri that is offered through the American Nursing Association, American Nurses Credentialing Center. There are 5 other specialties listed, and that's adult health, adult psychiatric, child adolescent psychiatric, gerontological, and pediatric. We do allow for continued license under these certifications, but not new licensure under those certifications, because those are called legacy certifications. Those were once granted in population focus, but are no longer granted by those organizations. So the clinical nurse specialists that come into California for initial license, whether that is through national certification or through completing a nurse practitioner, a clinical nurse specialist education program in California, must be nationally certified as adult geri, pediatric, or neonatal. And so this does remove the oncology one that is a specialty focus and not in alignment with the APR and consensus model. So this is just one form update. Additionally, there is the other form on there that talks about the certification of clinical nurse specialist, NRB B24, that had been updated. This is truly not something that is put into regulations. That is something that does need updated, and that will be done through the regulatory process. I did reach out and meet with the California Clinical Nurse Specialists Association for Clinical Nurse Specialists, as well as the National Association for Clinical Nurse Specialists. With the National Association, there's only one national association, which is very different than our nurse practitioners and nurse midwives who have more than the one. And so that made it easy to kind of reach out and work with them. The California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists, they did develop some regulatory language that they are interested in submitting to our board for consideration. And that is something we will evaluate when we get to that point. But those are really the items here that really needed to come up for discussion as we've had the conversation within the practice committee that both CNSs and CRNAs are here in California and allowable for licensure and education and such through the statute in our Business Profession Code and Nurse Practice Act, but our board has not developed any regulations yet. So that's really the discussion here. The possible action is to accept the update on NPRI 29 as an action if the board chooses to. That will help to guide our licensing process as we implement regulations. And we will then pull down the certification of clinical nurse specialist, NPR B24, and utilize that for development of regulations moving forward. Any questions from our board?
No, I have a question. I'm not sure I'm exactly following exactly what the issue is here. It's because you said that the California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists are developing some regulatory language, but we don't have that to consider, right?
We do not, and they developed it. We have not seen that. That was not done on an ask from our board. That was done by the association themselves. And so in the practice committee, there was talk about sunsetting APRN, creating a CNS advisory committee, and then a CNS advisory committee would consider those regulations if that's the way that the board chooses to vote, and they will either develop them further, accept them as is, or reject them. That's going to be a process that goes through that committee. And then that committee will make recommendations to the board. The regulations process is not as simple as you get it from an organization, you accept it. It has to go through a full development process. It has to be vetted. It has to go through our staff that writes for every line of text that's inputted into regulation, you have to have a supporting factor as to why it's there. And it typically requires them to be evidence-based. I haven't seen one that hasn't yet, but I can only speak about the past couple of years. And then that moves forward and goes through the process of public comment periods, et cetera. So it's not a direct lift. Now, when I did meet with them on Friday morning, the California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists says they have to get the language approved through their board. And they're hoping to get that done this month. And when they get that approved, then they are looking at sending it over to us for evaluation. And that us is the board staff to look at for a regulatory process. And if the advisory committee is formed, then share it with the advisory committee as well.
Okay, so what are we considering now?
So currently there's an outdated form on our website, and that form has NPR I-29. It's in the blue text, and you can see that it has the Oncology Nursing Certification Corporation that no longer issues the role-based, population-focused clinical nurse specialist national certifications. And so we need to update this form and remove that so there is no confusion for our potential license or applicants. And then the other form that is on there let me back out of here. On top of that agenda item is a certification of clinical nurse specialist NPR B24. That was done by our board as a board advisory. That is not a law, and that is not something that we can legally follow or require any of our licensees or applicants to follow. So that needs to be turned into some sort of regulation. And so we would remove this from our board's website, and we would then update this and put that through any kind of regulatory process that would need to be done. This is modeled after the APRN consensus model, and we would also use that as guidance as well as we look forward to developing future regulation. The practice that our board did historically, where they did not develop regulations, but instead did board actions or board, excuse me, these board advisories, is not something that we can follow moving forward. We do need to put them all into regulations, and we do need to put them through the Office of Administrative Law and follow that process.
Okay, and then one other question. Would this change anything? I know we had a clinical nurse specialist who was really struggling trying to figure out how to get certification, because there's 3 options on there, but in reality, only one of the options was really credible. Would this address that?
It does not address that yet, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to address that readily. The problem that we have ran into is that our academic institutions are meeting the needs of the community and developing clinical nurse specialist tracks that are specific to the community that they serve and not specific to national certification. Licensing has to occur in a population focus, and that is the national certifications of what you see with our nurse practitioners as well as our CNSs is adult, GERI, family, individual across the lifespan, women's health, gender related, psychiatric, mental health, and pediatrics or neonatal. And so those are the population focus, and that is what the APRN consensus model says. That's what is licensable. Within those, you can get a specialty focus like a wound care or an ostomy nurse or a diabetic clinical nurse specialist or even an emergency room nurse practitioner, et cetera. Those are specialty focuses within those population focus. But population focus is where the licensure occurs. So now that this has been brought to our attention, we'll be reaching out to our academic partners and letting them know that they need to prepare their students to the population focus. They can add additional tracks after that population focus is met. And so one of the examples is the women's health clinical nurse specialist that would most likely have to be done as individual across the lifespan. That would then encompass that, because there is no current national certification being offered for clinical nurse specialists in women's health. That national certification was retired and is no longer being offered. Therefore, we cannot license based on a national certification.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a start to clear up the language and, is that correct?
It's a start to create language. The board, because they were doing board advisories, never developed regulation. And so we have no regulations for clinical nurse specialists, no regulations on licensing, no regulations on academic requirements, no regulation on scope of practice. What we have is only in the Business Professions Code as statute. And what typically happens at a board or bureau level when you get statute is you develop a policy of some sort to implement that. And that policy is done through regulations. If not, you're deemed practicing underground regulations. So our board previously did these board advisories. That's not a practice that continues. And so we will be turning them into regulations.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so a possible motion could be to accept the update to the board advisory and continue to implement the APR and consensus model.
Before we go to the motion, is there any other questions or comments from the board? No? Okay. I would like to make a motion to accept the updates to the board advisory NPR-I-29 and continue to implement the APRN consensus model as voted on by the board in 2008.
Seconded, Woods.
Thanks. All right, BRN moderator, can we open it up for public comment, please?
We'll be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Alyssa Brown would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Brown. I'm a clinical nurse specialist, and I actually was on the advisory committee when the legislation passed. And we actually did develop preliminary regulations that kind of disappeared when our staff member disappeared. So I'm really glad that we're taking this up again. I also just want to comment for some more history that the advisory review, which got us to some of this, was directed by the board to our APRN advisory committee, and was a good example of what the APRN advisory committee did as a project, and even worked together. So I worked with an NP on an advisory that was relevant for more than just CNSs. In terms of the list of certifying bodies, just again, some more history, there were many more. With the ones that I think are being referred to as legacy certifications, I've been certified by ANCC since 1984 as a CNS, and you do have to go through a whole renewal process. You have to have a certain number of CE, other things in your portfolio in order to renew that certification. So it's not automatic at all. So I've continued to do that, and that's done every 5 years, like most of the national certifications. Anyway, just wanted to comment on that, and I'm really glad we're getting to this, and everyone's going to have regulations. And I think it was developed, the advisory was developed to inform the public and inform the profession about what CNSs are and what they do. And that will still be in there, and the legislation is still there. So I'm looking forward to working with the board on regulations. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Diane Tompkins would like to make Diane Tompkins would like to make a comment, please. Diane Tompkins. We'll come back to Diane. Pamela Jane Nye would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. This is the more appropriate conversation, Tompkins? I think, than when I attempted to comment earlier. I'm also a clinical nurse specialist. I'm also board certified. And directly out of university, I was encouraged to get that certification. My question is this. I also am an associate professor to the School of Nursing at UCLA, where I teach clinical nurse specialists and NP, and I teach in both in the dual role. My question is this. Are we having only clinical nurse specialists make the decisions about our practice, or are we engaging nurse practitioners to make decisions about our role, as they are very, very different?
I can answer, I can answer that a little bit. It is dependent on what the board votes in a subsequent agenda item here today. If the Advanced Practice Registered Nursing Advisory Committee continues, there are 2 nurse practitioners, 2 nurse anesthetists, 2 clinical nurse specialists, and 2 CNSs on that committee, that if all are present and all items are filled, those groups would opine on this. If the board takes the recommendation from the Nurse Practice Committee, which is to sunset and form 2 additional committees, then a CNS committee, advisory committee, will be formed, where it will be a group of CNSs that would work on the regulations. And that was recognized by the board as a reason to the board's practice committee as a reason to potentially sunset the APRNAC and create a new clinical nurse specialist advisory committee, as well as a certified registered nurse anesthetist advisory committee. Hopefully that answers your question.
That certainly makes more sense to me. The second option, that is.
Thank you for your comment. Diane Tompkins.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Diane Tompkins from the American Nurses Credentialing Center. Just want to make you aware of a minor edit in the URL for ANCC. I can put in the chat the correct URL. It's www.nursingworld.org/ANCC.
Thank you.
Otherwise, that's it. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. We'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Vice President Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods.
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Patricia Nguyen.
Nguyen, yes.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, yes.
David Lawler
David Lawler, yes.
and Vicky Granowitz.
Vicky Granowitz, yes.
Okay, motion carries. Moving on to the next item.
Okay, thank you. Board President Trujillo, and I'm sorry, Trujillo. 7.5, 7.6, and 7.7 were all discussed within the Nurse Practice Advisory Nurse Practice Board Committee, and the board does have an option to accept the recommendations as is from the Nurse Practice Committee, or hear any one of these individually, or by pulling one out, or just going forward and hearing each item as their own individual presentation. How would you like to proceed?
Any questions or comments from the board?
I would like to accept it as is.
I second that.
So just for clarification, David, are you making a motion to accept the recommendations from the Nurse Practice Committee for agenda items 7.5, 7.6, and 7.7?
Yes, through the chair, if I may, I am making that motion.
Okay. And Dolores, you seconded that emotion?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. We can go out to public comment if there's no further discussion from our board members.
Thank you.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate they would like to make a comment by typing in the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Cheryl Goldfarb.
This is,
Greenwood.
sorry, Reza here. I understand the motion to be to accept the recommendation of the Nursing Practice Committee regarding the items on this agenda, 7.5, 7.6, 7.7. I think it'd be helpful to go through each of those and state what the Nursing Practice Committee did for the benefit of the board and the public.
Yes,
So,
definitely.
if you're not going to at least take them individually, at least identify individually what those actions were.
Yes, I apologize that
Recommendations, I should say, as opposed to actions. Sorry.
Yes, I'm used to that being similarly done as the Education License Committee, where we actually put that on the agenda. So on 7.4, the board, the Nurse Practice Board Committee made the recommendation to the board to develop the regulations for clinical nurse specialists and certified registered nurse anesthetist. On 7.6, the Nurse Practice Committee made the recommendation to amend the name of the national certifying body for the clinical, for the certified registered nurse anesthetist. That will be carried over and turned into some legislative staff that we're working with as part of just kind of cleaning up some of our statutory language. And then 7.7, the Nurse Practice Board Committee recommended sunsetting the APRN as advisory committee and creating 2 additional committees. One would be for the clinical nurse specialist, and one would be for the certified registered nurse anesthetist, with the members of the APRN committee that are in those specialties to be granted to acceptance into the new committees. And so the 2 CNS representatives, if they were in place, would go to the CNS committee, and the 2 CRNAs that are in place would go to the CRNA committee. Those were the recommendations that came from the Nurse Practice Board Committee, and that is what the motion is to accept. Thank you for bringing that forward, Reza.
Thank you. Cheryl Goldfarb Greenwood would like to make a comment. I'll come back to you, Cheryl. Alyssa Brown would like to make a comment.
Thank you very much. My name is Alyssa Brown. I'm a longtime clinical nurse specialist, like 50 years, and a California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists member. With their statewide expertise amongst the CNSs, this is a large, diverse group that is the best group to create regulations for CACNSs. As I mentioned before, we have draft regulations, which hopefully will soon be ready, that we would bring to the California APRN Advisory Committee, if it's still there, to review. That seemed like the best process. And since they're the experts in advanced practice registered nursing, from there we would partner with the practice committee to finalize the regulations. And I do appreciate the efforts to catch up on regulations. It's been a long time. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And I will try Cheryl again. Cheryl Goldfarb Greenwood.
Thank you. Sorry about that. This is Cheryl Goldfarb Greenwood. I'm a clinical nurse specialist and board member for the California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists. I too want to thank the board and Loretta Melby and the Nurse Practice Committee for your attention and consideration to the practice of California CNSs. CACNS, the California Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists, is the California affiliate to the National Association of Clinical Nurse Specialists. We believe that with the CACNS's widespread and diverse California membership, they're an obvious choice to create these draft regulations for California CNSs. And we're hoping, as Alyssa said, that once these draft regulations have been approved by the CACNS board, we would like to take those to the California APRN Advisory Committee. I also wanted to comment on 7.7, or are we only taking one at a time?
You can comment on 7.7 as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and in light of that, I'm sorry, this is Reza. I would ask our moderator to grant additional time since we're dealing with technically 3 separate agenda items, 3 separate topics. But to the commenter, as was just said, yes, you can make your comments on 7.5, 7.6, and 7.7.
Yes, regarding 7.7, the sunsetting of the APRN Advisory Committee, I'd like to advocate for the continuation of the APRN Advisory Committee by the BRN. This is a collaborative model that ensures a unified voice across all 4 APRN roles. The consensus model of APRN regulation from 2008 includes, under the section Foundational Requirements for Licensure, boards of nursing will have an APRN advisory committee that includes representatives of all 4 APRN roles. Sunsetting the APRN Advisory Committee will result in a lack of access to joint APRN advisories, statements, and related practice issues, which requires input and knowledge and expertise from all 4 APRN roles. The BRN Practice Committee, it was proposed that the BRN Nursing Practice Committee take on these roles. However, that will leave us with a gap because the Nurse Practice Committee does not include representation from all 4 APRN groups. And this structure and expertise that is already established with the APRN Advisory Committee fulfills this role very well, as you've heard with the review of advisories and joint commitment and expertise that's been identified and performed in the since 2018. I have one other concern regarding the Bailey-Keene Open Meetings Act, which I'm concerned may prohibit the 4 APRN advisory committees from collaborating and performing joint work. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Melanie Rowe would like to make a comment.
Melanie Rowe.
I am a CRNA, and on behalf of the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists, as a practice director, I would like to make a comment. As you know, CRNAs have been safely administering anesthesia to Californians since the early 20th century, and the California Association of Nurse Anesthetists, or CANA, looks forward to working with the BRN to reflect our current practice. This is regarding 7.5. Regarding 7.6, we agree and support the verbiage submitted by the CRNAs on the APRN Advisory Committee, and we thank them for their service. Regarding 7.7, we support the continuation of the APRN Advisory Committee as it is now, but do appreciate the efforts and the suggestion that the current CRNAs would be the chair and co-chair of a new CRNA Advisory Committee, and understand that the regulation work for both the CNS and CRNAs would take precedent. And it was mentioned in the practice committee meeting a few weeks ago that at some point the APRN committee, advisory committee, could join once again. And I think that is a great idea, so that the four APRN groups can work together. As the previous speaker mentioned, we enjoy working together, and I think once our separate key issues are worked out and that time has spent, then we will be able to rejoin and work together towards common goals for serving Californians in their healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Dr. Mitchell Erickson would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Good afternoon, BRN board. Thank you for indulging me as you approach the future of the APRNAC 7.7 as the chair of that committee. I want to thank the prior BRN executive officer leadership for the fulfillment of a national recommendation for state boards, from state boards of nursing through the consensus model to create this committee, to create an opportunity for dialogue via a committee for representatives of all APRNs to meet jointly with the public and discuss their common and unique and evolving practice. I want to recognize the 10 volunteer members of the APRNAC committee that embrace this opportunity in the interest of how their practice intersected with the public in delivering comprehensive and safe quality care. There's been some criticism regarding the practice issues this committee addressed. It has always been within the public interest or perceived by BRN priorities and based on the committee's membership professional expertise. They also met an environment of substantial legislative change around scope of practice. As the BRN moved towards developing a pathway to regulation, as it implemented legislation, the APRNAC's role was forced to shift its attentions, but had acted as a public discussion portal in the interim. You have in your packet letters of support from the APRNAC, our committee meetings from all state professional organizations to maintain this committee or create an opportunity for its intention to be preserved. As was mentioned at the practice committee meeting, this was discussed. I ask the board as it makes its final determination regarding the future of the APRNAC that it is mindful of this intention and not lose sight of enshrining this necessary type of interprofessional interaction at the BRN and avoid silos of professional practice. I believe any decision should ensure that APRNs jointly communicate with the public as it delivers as the public deserves. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Alyssa Brown would like to speak. She spoke earlier and we only gave her the 2 minutes and then we changed it to the full time. So I'm thinking she has more to say.
She can speak again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I didn't realize we could cover any of these. I also want to speak in support of maintaining the APRN Advisory Committee. I'm on that committee. I've enjoyed the collaboration and the collegiality and our strong interest together in providing the best healthcare we can for the public. The committee demonstrates an advantage of this collaboration and a unified voice of the 4 APRN roles. It's also a unified voice, again, in addressing the safety and providing health care to the public. All 4 organizations, as Mitch and others have mentioned, have continued their support of maintaining this. It was voted on in the past to maintain it by the board. And furthermore, the consensus model, as Cheryl mentioned, when I last checked last year, there were at least 20 states already who have created such APRN advisory committees with all 4 roles represented, and I felt like we would be going backward. I urge the board to acknowledge the ongoing APRN advisory committee and provide to the public the kind of support and safety that they deserve. And please support the continuation of the APRN advisory committee. Thank you.
This is Reza, board counsel. I just want to make a clarification and make sure that there's no lingering confusion, which would be understandable if so. At the moment, we are discussing kind of in a consolidated way, agenda items 7.5, 7.6, and 7.7. Even though they are on 3 different, somewhat different topics, the reason I believe they were consolidated into one discussion was because the Nursing Practice Committee made recommendations regarding the 3. So I think at the beginning of this discussion, it was decided to kind of combine them. For the public, again, if you have comments regarding 7.5, 7.6, or 7.7, now is the time to make those. And again, 7.7 is the APRN Advisory Committee's future role and continuation. 7.6 regarding the update on the National Certifying Body for CRNAs. 7.5 being development of regulations for CNSs and CRNAs.
Thank you for your comment. Sarani Harkwan would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Thank you, moderator. Sarani Kwan. I'm the nurse practitioner working in Northern California at Community Clinic. I've had the pleasure of working with all of the different APRNs in my various jobs, and want to speak on behalf of Reza, correct me, 7.2 for the APRN Advisory Committee. I've found that committee to be
7.7.
Sorry, 7.7.
No problem. You said the correct.
Thank you for that committee to be very helpful in addressing APRN specific issues that aren't necessarily something that would be effectively discussed in a BRN meeting, and certainly not specific for the NP Advisory Committee, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to just comment on how useful I found that committee to be to bring topics forward to discuss. And an example of that, E.O. Melby may remember, and Reza, I think you as well, we had issues with the recognition of APRNs to sign for home health orders. Remember all of that during COVID. And after the waiver expired, then California had changed the regulations to allow it, and there was a lot of confusion amongst the Home Health Professional Association. In any case, and then second thing I'd like to add, and I'm not sure if I recall the CNS number, but I would like to encourage the board to update regulations. I would like to see our CNS colleagues lifted up in the state of California. We are far behind many other states, and I work with many CNSs in my other job and find them incredibly valuable to the care of our patients in every setting. So I'd like to see more CNSs in California. I'd like to see them with updated regulations. I'd like to see them actually prescribing within certain settings under standardized procedures, and I'd like to see them expand into ambulatory services. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Third President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yes.
So Reza, did you have something to say? Oh, sorry. So I would just like some clarification. We are not discontinuing conversation or discussion on practice for CRNA or CNS, correct?
Not discontinuing that at all. We would actually be adding advisory committee specifically with the focus of CNS that would work on regulations to do that expanded care, to look at getting furnishing license for the CNS, to look at having them expanded into ambulatory settings. California is definitely behind the times when we're looking at CNSs. And so it would really be a benefit to have more than 2 CNSs to opine on that through that advisory committee. Additionally, with CRNAs, we have no regulations for CRNAs. They come in through a national certification. We do have some basic statutory requirements, but it would be of benefit to have a group of CRNAs to develop some basic regulations that would be able for our board to implement on licensing, on fees, on just a multitude of things. That would be very helpful. Again, that was one of an ask from the nurse anesthetist group as well, is to get the prescribing authority as well without having to even have furnishing, but get to prescribe based on their license alone. Very similar to the movement that is happening within the nurse midwives and the nurse practitioners as they're working towards that ability to prescribe on their license alone and not have to have a furnishing license, hence in the sunset, the combining of licensure. And so that is a lot of the practice concerns that have been brought forward to us at the board by CNSs, by CRNAs that want that work to be done. And that was one of the big discussions within the practice committee of why they would do a separate committee, advisory committee for each one. One of the other things that was discussed is that each one of those would then come to the practice committee, the board practice committee, and report out and have that collaboration of all 4 specialty, advanced practice specialty areas to be able to come in and have that generalized consensus and look at anything that is effective of all 4 of those groups.
Yeah, I've been impressed with the NMAC and NPAC committees and the work that they've accomplished thus far. It would be nice to see that type of work also being accomplished for the CRNAs and the CNSs, and give them that laser focus.
Beautiful boy, Freddie.
Excuse me?
Sorry.
That's okay. And to give them that focus on issues within their practice in a timely manner. So we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. Is there any other comments or questions from the board? No?
I actually do have a question. I am really concerned with all the public comment about concern for dissolving the current APRN committee. And I know, Lori, in the past, you have stated that there were administrative issues with trying to. I think that what I'm hearing from the public is support for a CNS committee, support for a CRNA committee, but also a desire to keep the APRN. What would be, is that a potential in terms of administrative support from your team?
We could keep the APRN-NC committee. It would be very difficult for them to function because they would then be the in-between before going to the board. It would be all of them kind of reporting out together. So you would have to take information from the NPAC committee and then put that into APRN for consideration of all 4. You would take information from NMAC committee and put that into APRN for consideration of all 4. If we created the CRNA and the CNS committees, we would then take that and put it into consideration for all 4. Additionally, members are not able to dually serve. And so the 2 CNSs and 2 CRNAs that would be on the APRN committee would not then be able to be on the CNS or CRNA committee, and we would really lose some of that history and that expertise. And so could it be done Hesitantly, I would say yes, because it would take a lot of extra planning and work to ensure that that agenda would be effective of all and not one or two or three or four. It would be all matters. That is really better served within the practice committee, the board nurse practice committee. As you saw this last year, having the chairs come from the committees and report out and have discussions, having agenda items brought forth so they can all discuss. One of the things that we have planned for January is to bring NMAC and NPAC together, because it's a similar concept to talk about on the disciplinary guidelines. So we are having a meeting with both of those advisory committees together so that they can have the same information received and make the same recommendations and the same motions, if at all possible. And so we do have a way to address any ones that have any committees that would then have to take into consideration the other ones. It would not be easy to do the APRN-AC. We would have to seriously align them into something that probably wouldn't even behoove them at that point, because it would have to be stripped down so severely for them to be able to continue to only focus on the factors that affect all four. And that really is what the nurse practice committee is developed to do.
And are there Bagley-Keene concerns about, if we do establish the four committees, about them all meeting together on a regular basis to address issues that pertain to all of the advanced practice roles?
No, they would not. They can meet together at the board committee. And sorry, Reza, you can go on and do that, or we can separately notice them as we are doing with NMAC and NPAC. Go for it, Reza.
Yeah, I would agree. Just in short, in response to that, and somebody else had previously mentioned something about Bagley-Keene potentially being an obstacle to collaboration amongst the various advisory committees. I don't see that as an issue. Worst case scenario, we might, as Lori mentioned just now, separately notice a meeting of each of those for the same day and the same time, and that would be compliant to give notice. In short, we'll definitely figure out a way, the kind of most simple, straightforward way, but it's not going to prevent them from collaborating. It's just a matter of how we go about noticing it and all that. So I'm not particularly concerned about that.
Should we have these four committees, all four of them would report into the BRN Nursing Committee? Is that
They can report into the nurse practice committee, which is held every 3 months, as well as the board, which is held again every 3 months. So they could come together, 8 times a year and work collaboratively together within the practice committee and the board committee if they have an item on there that they want us to agendize.
Can I say something?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, Vicki.
We discussed this at length in August, as I recall. And what I remember is that there was something about how this could be duplicative and that people were having trouble with making change and moving into a new era, and that this was really about moving into a new era and that there was resistance to that. And it sounded like the group was doing good work, but that they were also having a lot of fun. And nobody really wants to stop doing something where they feel like they're doing good work and having fun. But I think that this is about change. And if we make the change, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there would be an opportunity to reevaluate it at a later date and see if we needed to make another change. But I was persuaded because I've been in situations where change was just really difficult, and I don't feel like we're going over new information. I feel like we're just redoing what we already discussed in August, and it is almost 5 o'clock and there's still a lot to go. So I would really like us to call the question and move forward. but that's me.
This is Reza. If I could just briefly chime in on that. You're right, Vicky. We have discussed this quite a bit, and even before you were brought onto the board, I think there have been discussions about the continuation. So this is, you're absolutely right, not a new issue. However, what was discussed previously, I don't believe any action was taken to, disband the APRN Advisory Committee or create the other new committees or any of that. There were recommendations made by the Nursing Practice Committee. So the topic today is whether to accept that recommendation and formally, actually, officially take the actions, whatever actions you may choose to take. The one other thing I wanted to kind of, and this is kind of my own comment, I'm not sure, I think Lori touched on this a little bit, but the way I kind of heard it, I was not quite sure on exactly what was being said, but an issue that occurred to me with the creation of the CNS and the CRNA committees was that in the past with the APRN Advisory Committee, when we created the NPAC and updated the NMAC, we carved out the nurse practitioner and nurse midwife issues from the scope of the APRN Advisory Committee. So again, that APRN committee is looking at issues that affect CNSs, CRNAs, and APRNs as a whole. If you were to create two new committees, one for CNS and one for CRNA, presumably you would do the same thing and carve out those practice areas from APRN Advisory Committee so that what's left is APRN Advisory Committee looking at issues that affect APRNs as a whole. And some examples have been brought up of issues that did seem to kind of touch on APRNs as a whole, or at least multiple groups of APRNs. I think probably more commonly the latter, maybe just affecting a couple of groups as opposed to all four. But I think there are issues that will affect APRNs generally. How many and how often? That's, I think, a significant question to consider, and whether it justifies having a standing advisory committee and how frequently it's going to meet and all that. Right now, you can consider, with whatever current frequency of meetings is of the APRN Advisory Committee, if you create two other new committees and carve out additional areas, take away additional scope from the APRN Advisory Committee, naturally there's going to be less left over for the APRN Advisory Committee to address. There are issues, and there have in the past been, and certainly will continue to be in the future. Lori has mentioned how there currently is a forum to take on those types of things in the Nursing Practice Committee. So that's just to suggest that you keep that in mind as far as what's left, and that was all. Thanks.
Okay,
Any
Board
other
President. Yes, sorry, thank you. I was just going to ask if you were wanting to open it back up for any more comments from the board, or do a roll call vote.
Just going to ask the board if they had any other comments or questions. No? Okay, we'll open it
Before
up.
doing the vote, I'd like to just recap. Oh, sorry, Dolores, what was your next?
Oh,
We
I
can
was
take
going to
the vote.
vote, but if you want to what were you
Okay.
going to
I just want to recap, just because we're doing it, technically the motion covers 3 agenda items. So the motion is to accept the recommendations from the Nursing Practice Committee regarding agenda items 7.5, 7.6, and 7.7. Those recommendations were for 7.5 to develop regulations for CNSs and CRNAs. For 7.6, Nursing Practice Committee recommended to amend the name of the National Certifying Body for CRNAs, or to pursue that change. For 7.7, the Nursing Practice Committee recommended sunsetting the APRN Advisory Committee, creating 2 additional committees for CNSs and CRNAs, and having the members of the APRN Advisory Committee that are in those 2 specialties to be granted membership into the new committee if they desire to transition into that. So if you vote yes on the motion, you will be voting to take the nursing practice committee's recommendations on all 3 of those. If you wish to, I think it would be good now before the vote for any board member to indicate if they want to vote no on 1 or more of those, because you might want to vote yes on 1 and no on 2, or
Sure.
So
Are there any members of the board who would like to pull one of those out to vote differently? No? Okay. And everybody understands we're voting as one, all 3 of these as one, to accept the recommendations from the Nurse Practice Committee for these agenda items.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Vice President Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods.
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, yes.
David Lawler.
David Lawler, yes.
Patricia Nguyen.
Nguyen, yes.
And Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz, yes.
All right, motion carries. Moving on to the next agenda item. I believe we're on 8.0.
Yes, we are. And Dr. Mary Fagan, I'm sorry, Dr. Mary Ann McCarthy is elevated and ready to go.
Hi, good afternoon.
This is
Mary Ann.
sorry, Reza here. I just wanted to remind of the time. Are we going to? Do you want to dive into ELC?
Yeah,
or
we're going to
time
start.
left?
Yep, we'll start it.
Okay, thanks so much. Good afternoon, Mary Ann McCarthy. Supervising nursing education consultant and liaison to the Education Licensing Committee. Okay, for agenda item 8.0, I first want to pull out one item. I have one item that I need to pull out for correction, and that is 8.2.5, which is Unitech College. And I'm just going to pull them out and update you guys as a correction. As far as everything else, everything that's on 8.1 and everything that's on 8.2, 8.1 were all consent agenda items that were heard and voted, and you can see the votes on your agenda. They all were unanimously passed for the consent agenda items, and everything on 8.2 was discussed and recommended for approval. And so, again, you can see all those. So 8.1 and 8.2, with the exception of 8.2.5, which I'm pulling out, have all been to ELC and have been put forward as either consent agenda items or recommendations for approval.
And the 8.2.5 is not being pulled out for discussion, it's pulled out for a correction. When the motion was given, it was given for 50 students 2 times a year, yet the school asked for 40 students 2 times a year. So on that motion, it would be a correction. And so they're asking to have the Education Licensing Committee recommendations accepted with the correction to 8.2.5 to approve the enrollment increase with 40 instead of 50 students 2 times a year as requested by the school.
Are there any questions?
Dolores, do you have any questions?
Oh, I don't. Anyone from the board have any questions or comments? No.
Is there anybody who wants to make a motion
No.
to accept the recommendations from the ELC committee with the the update as requested by the school?
Yes. So I would like to make a motion to accept the Education Licensing Committee recommendations for agenda items 8.1 through 8.2 with the revision to the motion 8.2.5. This is the one regarding Unitech, correct?
Yes.
Changing the enrollment pattern from 50 students 2 times a year to 40 students 2 times a year. So this is just a correction as requested by the school. Do I have a second?
Jovita seconds.
All right. Any questions or comments from the board before we go into public comment?
No.
All right. Baron moderator, can we open it for public comment, please?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment."
Thank you, board moderator. Just for clarification to the public, 8.3 is the remaining item to be discussed for the Education Licensing Committee meeting. And so if your comment is in relations to Concordia University Irvine, please hold that for agenda item 8.3.
Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Vice President Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods.
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, yes.
Patricia Nguyen.
Nguyen, yes.
David Lawler.
David Lawler, yes.
And Vicki Granowitz.
Vicki Granowitz, yes.
All right.
Motion's
Dolores.
passed.
Yeah.
8.3 is the remaining item for Education Licensing Committee. If the board wishes to hear that today, we can, or we can recess until tomorrow and start with 8.3. That is at the discretion of the board today.
How long will this take?
It is an enrollment increase request for
Yes.
Concordia University. It is located in Irvine. That is known to be a compacted area. We do have letter support on our website, and it may be a difficult decision to come to a determination on. So it may benefit to take that into consideration tomorrow morning when people are fresh and ready to go. Or we can end it with tonight. I'm sure people have been waiting here to participate as part of the school and public comment. It's completely up to you guys.
I'm in favor of picking it up tomorrow. Any
Ditto.
other?
So am I. I can't stay much longer. I have another.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, guys. So, board president, if you want to make the motion to recess today and open back up at 9 o'clock tomorrow, starting at 8.3. And just real quick, I would like to just, because we did do the sunsetting of the APRNAC, I really wanted just to take a moment to acknowledge all the members of the APRNAC. 2 of them here participate in public comments, so I know that they're on, and they were really just pivotal today in public comment, with both being Alyssa and Mitch. So thank you guys very much. And we hope to see you around in future public comment. Don't think it ends just because you're no longer part of the APRNAC. Please come to our nurse practice board committee. Please come to our board meetings, participate in public comment, reach out to us, reach out via email, come and participate in the various advisory committees. And those of you guys that do hold either the nurse anesthetist or the CNS, I look forward to continuing to work with you guys in the newly established advisory committees, and we will start recruiting and get those filled as soon as we possibly can. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. I would like to take this moment to adjourn for the day and pick up tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with
recess.
item recess.
Yeah, we can't adjourn. Thank you. We has to recess.
To tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with picking up agenda item 8.3. Have a
Thank you
wonderful
guys very-
evening.
Thank you all.
See you
Thank you.
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.